in the cloud, and it should be recording. Go ahead, Mike.
Okay. So one of the hardest things that I faced during my transition was trying to figure out what business sector I wanted to be in. I wanted to be in high technology. I wanted to be working with the nonprofits to make a big social difference. I wanted to be able to balance my work life. I wanted to be able to do a whole bunch of product development and really focus on bringing things to market. I wanted to do all of this stuff, and I just needed that one perfect job that was going to let me do all of that. And so consequently, I spent a lot of time just researching in a circle, because I couldn't really understand the different sectors. And more importantly, I couldn't make up my mind because I wanted to do everything. And they talk about vets having a massive FOMO, fear of missing out, because there's a better opportunity, a better company, a better mission right around the corner. So what I wanted to talk about today really was talk about the business sectors, kind of what are the differences, what are some things to consider about yourself, as well as the different sectors as you're making this transition process. And this applies to both the people coming directly out of the military, as well as those that have been in a civilian job. If you've been in one job for the last 10 years, all you know is that actually that one industry, maybe that one company, maybe that just one job. And you're kind of curious, what else is out there and how do I find out some more? So I'd like to say that I came up with all these slides myself, but being the person I am, I actually found somebody who did it better and have shamelessly borrowed their slides, and you'll see their logo here in just a second. All right. Is that popping up for everybody? Okay, so obviously I took it from a MOAA brief, but it was a really great presentation, and I just wanted to share it with you. So I'm going to walk through this. Feel free, this is really a discussion, so feel free at any point to stop and ask questions and discuss things, insights that you've learned too along your way. Okay. So it's easy to get really focused when we're making a transition on the professional piece. In fact, Eagle Group is really focused on that professional transition. But keep in mind, for everybody getting out of the military, there's several things going on. Obviously it's professional. We're making a big career change, and we're really walking away from potentially everything that we've known into something completely different. But also on the personal side, there's a ton of changes going on, and not just for you, but for your entire family. One thing that happened for us when we made our transition, my wife and I were prepared for the professional. We knew it was going to be hard. We didn't know it was going to be quite as hard as it was, but we knew that there was challenges. We weren't surprised by the challenges, maybe the magnitude of the challenges, but not the existence of the challenges making a professional transition. One thing that we weren't prepared for was the impact that it was going to have on our family, particularly our kids. So when you think about all the moves, for example, all my kids were in at least 5 to 6 different school districts over their life. We moved in 22 years, we moved 11 different times. And what that started to create was build up a lot of emotional baggage in my kids. And so just as we were moving, a lot of those bags decided to open up. And it really had a huge impact on my transition. In fact, my wife spent most of her time during the summer while I was transitioning back in our previous duty station, working with my 2 college-aged sons, just because there was a lot of just stuff going on in their lives. And that made my own transition more difficult too, because I was stressed out about my family. I was stressed out about providing for my family. And I was also feeling very isolated because a lot of times it was just me going out all day on networking and coming home to an empty house because my wife was down in Kansas. So there's a lot of stuff that happens on a personal side that we don't necessarily take into account. And then that last one is the health transition. So there's 2 different scenarios. One, you're retiring from the military or separating from the military and you don't have any major health issues. Even in that case, we start getting away from our routines. We will stop going to doing PT, 5 days a week, and we have to find a new routine on top of all of the networking and everything else we're doing. So there's that. And then for some of us, there's a lot of health issues that we're dealing with, especially if you've done multiple deployments. We're facing both physical issues, we're facing spiritual, emotional, and mental issues all occurring at this time. So when you're making that transition, just keep that in mind and take it easy on yourself, because some days it can be really hard and you really want to beat yourself up. But understand that everybody's dealing with a lot. So embrace the change. So we kind of talked about the change of PT. For example, every morning I'd wake up at 6 in the morning, or actually 5:30 in the morning, go out to PT for an hour and a half, and then and my whole world actually kind of focused around that. It was okay from 6 to 7:30 not to be doing anything else. Once you start trying to do networking meetings, suddenly people want to have breakfast meetings. It's like, why are we going to do a breakfast meeting? That's PT time. Come on now. What's the matter? So a lot of these familiar routines will vanish. Think positively. So especially right now with COVID-19, it can be really hard because you started, like, say you were going to transition a year ago when you put in your retirement paperwork. There was nothing but jobs. They're going to be fighting over me. And now you're taking a look, and the jobs out there have gone from this all the way down to this. And so it can be really discouraging. But rather than find discouragement, just think positively. Just to say, what do I need to accomplish today? And use that as markers as you walk through. One big thing. So we hear this all the time about culture. In fact, I'm going to take some time to break this down. Civilian work culture is not like the military. That sounds like a kind of a dull moment, yet we won't necessarily appreciate how different it is until we really start getting involved. But before we start talking about the differences, I want to highlight one thing. Military culture is different, not better. Okay? We all remember what were the two best duty stations, in our career. That would be the duty station we came from and the duty station we're going to next, right? And so we get this mentality that maybe it was better in the military. The reality is two different worlds, neither one's better, they're just different. So let's talk about some of these differences. Okay, so we got the military on the right, we got the civilian on the left. So let's break this down. In terms of power and authority, okay? Coming from the military, we're used to the hierarchical structure. It's a comfortable structure. It actually gives us a certain amount of peace, because we walk in there, who's the highest ranking guy? Not me, cool. Or, oh, it's me, I need to make a decision. But either way, we all kind of work within that structure, and we quickly fall in that structure very, very easily. When you go into the civilian world, it's really much more about shared power and negotiated power. And there's a lot of different subtleties to that. But when the authority lines aren't clear, suddenly everybody is trying to feel their way through. If you worked in that environment for all your life, again, it's a comfortable world. I know that I have to do this. I know these are my indicators of who's going to be making the decisions, or I have the ability to influence those decisions. But for us coming from one side of the house to another, that's a big, big change. The next one, collectivist versus individualist. So we're really used to thinking in terms of the group. One way when we do it during our interviews, how often do we talk about we rather than I during the interview? And we walk away from that interview, and the interviewer will not have a clear idea of what we even did at the job. On the other hand, in a civilian world, the needs, wants of individuals are really, really high, because part of it is everybody can walk. If I don't like it, I can quit the job. When you're in the military, it's a lot harder to just quit the job without getting into a whole lot of trouble. Normally we call that AWOL, and it doesn't go well. But anyways, it's much more complicated to just walk away. But on the civilian world, you're always in a position where you can negotiate or seek another job. That might be a promotion, that might be a change in environment, and you just have a lot more options. And so that colors the whole power dynamic between that. Now during COVID-19, a little bit different, but eventually COVID-19 will pass, and we're going to find ourselves, back into something a little bit more normal. Next, how people come to decisions and how they assert themselves within groups. So when you're the highest ranking person in the room, it's real easy to assert your decision. It's really easy to make a decision. It's really easy to express your point of view. And we know that when we're not the highest ranking person, how we also have to assert our influence. When you're outside the military, consensus becomes really, really critical. And we think that that's kind of unique, but at the same time, if you've ever worked with a general officers steering committee or any large group of general officers and flag officers, you'll know that there's actually a lot of consensus seeking that occurs even within the military. But if you haven't been exposed to that world, you actually haven't seen that. But outside the military, this is really, really common. And then lastly, as far as restraint versus indulgence, I'm not quite sure on this one. The slide talks about suppressing gratification through societal norms versus having fun and enjoying life. I think you can enjoy life on either side, military, non-military, but that is what it is. So any questions or thoughts on the cultural differences that you've seen between military and outside of the military that really affected you or really just jumped out at you?
Hi, this is Brittany. Hi, Michael. I just caught the last of your of the thing. Every single week I have issues connecting. I have 3 computers, 2 phones, and every single one, there's not one that I can do everything on. And so I apologize for that. That is definitely a struggle and with interviewing. But I actually had an interview on Friday, and I had a former, he's an E8 retired, and I felt like the interview really turned on me or him and I. There was 3 of us on the phone call, and it was almost like him against me in our accomplishments or what he's done and what I haven't done. And he's like, "Oh, you're just retiring as an E7," and I was like, "Yep, that's just how it goes." When you lose E8 positions across brigades, that was a huge thing for all of us. We all got bottlenecked for the longest time, and it might not have anything to do with it, but I kind of feel like it does a little bit. And yeah, I guess I thought I was a senior rank, and then I had a former military guy in the interview, and I feel like it didn't go very well after that.
Yeah, sorry to hear that. Funny that you should mention that, because I'm going to talk about titles here in just a second, because it comes into play a lot when we're making our transition as well. So we're going to hold that for just a second here, because actually what you said is very, very relevant.
Hi, my name is James. I don't know if you can hear me, Michael.
Hi, James.
Yeah, I think one of the things that took me a while to get used to was accountability. Either I would see someone who would fail upwards spectacularly, or getting used to the concept of not taking all of the burden onto myself, that if there's another manager that has an issue, then, try to support that person, but not necessarily take over and somehow take the onus on yourself for their mistakes, which, in the military, you kind of always wanted to be a team, but there has to be a certain separation in regards of responsibility for your peers as well sometimes in the civilian world that it took a little getting used to after I got out of the military.
You know what, James, what's super interesting about that too is the definitions of our responsibilities and our job responsibilities in some sectors are more defined than others. So for example, if I'm working in a nonprofit, the definition of what your job responsibilities are is very, very broad. Versus if I'm working, say, in the government, not military, but just in the government, it tends to be very, very defined. And then each company in the private sector, it kind of varies by company to company.
Yeah, I would say so. And I'm in the IT and the business end, so I deal with directors and VPs and so that's kind of where I'm coming from. I should have stated that earlier. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, great comments. So let's actually talk a little bit. Well, let's talk about this first, and then we'll come back to titles and accountabilities. So oftentimes, really the question that we're going through when we're making this transition process is what do the employers want? We know what we can bring to the table, but does that match with what the employers are looking for? So let's just be honest in terms of technical proficiencies. That means what's your value added, okay? So one way to define that is tech and business savvy. So as vets, we have a lot of technical skills, okay? If I'm a field artillery officer, I've worked very extensively with firing calculations, firing solutions, all these processes, but that technical skill may not be what the employer is looking for. It's actually probably not what most employers are looking for outside of the DoD. So we kind of have to be really honest with ourselves and understanding what's the value we're bringing to the table, and where are we savvy and where are we not. I've seen a lot of people say, well, I'm a business analyst, or I'm a project manager, or I'm this. But the reality is, if I ask, well, when was the last time you did a net present value? Talk to me about profit and loss. Talk to me about funding allocations. Talk to me about all these other things. And the answer is maybe that person doesn't have that experience. So part of this process is really assessing what I've done, what I haven't done, what matches and what doesn't, what matches well, what matches kind of, and what doesn't match at all. And then being able to say, okay, so that's some of my experiences. Now, what about things like my soft skills, my leadership ability, and these other things? And how does that add to my overall value that I can bring to the company? And then how do I make those employers see that? And it's really, really critical. We talked about that translation from military background to military skills to civilian skills, but it also goes in terms of job descriptions. I've seen guys who said, well, I was a company commander, so therefore I was a CEO. And that sends a completely different message. There's a CEO does a whole lot more than what a company commander does in a lot of cases. And a company commander might do a whole lot more than a CEO in other cases, but the two are not necessarily equivalent. The rest of these things are kind of things we've all be self-sufficient, good fit on the team, understanding the culture. And that kind of goes back to what we talked about, the differences of the culture, but also the challenges of discovering what is the culture of a company as you're going through the application of the job search process. Okay, so we just talked about how important it is to understand ourselves. So really there's three different things when we take a look at how do we assess. We assess our own personal and economic motivators. We assess the job itself, that includes the company, and we assess the location. One of the things when you're making a transition, if you've already picked the location, I want to live in the Twin Cities, you've kind of already helped define that. Other people will transition and say, I'm just looking for an interesting job or something that inspires me, and I'm willing to move anywhere in the country. That's a very broad search parameters. So let's start breaking down these three and what they mean. Okay, so factors, personal and economic motivators. So we talked about some of this stuff. A lot of people have passion, but what are you passionate about? What really would motivate you and inspire you to come to work? What is that purpose that you're looking for? And the reality is, a lot of times when you're transitioning, you don't know, because all you know is what's been in the military. If you're lucky enough to be a year or two out, you have time to take a look and start doing some exploratory research to kind of figure that out. The next, and Brittany mentioned it, titles. So a lot of people say, when I'm getting out of the military, I don't care about my title anymore. I'm taking my rank off and setting it aside. But at the same time, let's see, when I left, I was an E7, so that would be equivalent to this position. Or I was a lieutenant colonel, so that would be equivalent to this position. So therefore, I want to go with the next level higher or just one level lower. The fact that when we immediately start to do that, when we start to kind of try to make equivalencies for our ranks and really start measuring things in those in that group, that means that we're really still thinking in that hierarchical structure, and that we haven't fully transitioned out of the military. And for some people, that's fine. They might work for a DoD contractor, which works, very structured, or they might work for a government agency that works very structured. But for other companies and other environments, that's going to cause problems. I remember my first job interview that I did, my first phone interview, it was with a web development company, small, kind of nimble, agile group. And the first question they asked was, we wanted to know why a person like you would apply for a job like me, or a job like ours, and for a company like ours. And you know, that interview was challenging. It was interesting. But obviously they were going in with a certain bias and expectation too, because of my military background. And the biggest thing that they were concerned about was, because they asked, how do you feel about going from an environment where everything's planned out and executed to plan, versus someplace where we have no process at all? You know, if you've been in the military for a day, you know that nothing's fully planned out and absolutely nothing goes according to plan. But that was the perception. Not surprisingly, I didn't get that job. Other factors to consider about this title and authority kind of go together, and that includes when you get the retired E8 that looks down at you and says, "Oh well, you're just an E7," or you get the retired, you know, general officer or colonel that says, "Oh, you just made it to, you know, such and such rank." Salary. So salary, there's a lot of different ways to look at salary. That's a whole long conversation in and of itself. But the place to start is figuring out, how much do you need? How much do you need to get by, and how much would you like to go get on top of that? I'm just going to skip down to, oops, I didn't mean to skip that far down. As far as spouse career needs. Okay, so one of the things I promised my wife was that when I left the Army, that we would move wherever she wanted, no matter what. And I made that promise back when we first joined the Army back in 1996. When we were transitioning, we actually had a big disagreement on where to settle down, because she had a job in Kansas and wanted to stay there, and for me, a lot of the jobs that I was looking for were in the Twin Cities area, and all our family was up in the Twin Cities, including our daughter. So that created a tremendous amount of tension that carried over into those first several months. I would say, honestly, the first year of that transition. Just long story short, what happened is we prayed together on it and said, God, please send us a sign that we can't miss on where you want us to go. That weekend, our daughter came down from Mankato to Kansas, and her husband announced that they were having a baby. So I said, I think that's our sign. So off we went up to Minnesota, but there was still a lot of tension. So don't underestimate your spouse's career needs. I mean, those are absolutely essential, as is kids' stability and extended family needs. Work-life balance. So one of the things that they told us in TAP was that some of you guys may have said that all I want to do when I leave the Army is just to be the greeter at Walmart, which I had said. And then they also pointed out the guy also pointed out, you wouldn't last 6 hours at Walmart before you wanted to knife hand somebody, which would probably also be true, especially if you've watched the news lately. But understanding that work-life balance is really important, because it can be in conflict with the title, authority, or salary that you may want. Depending on your family needs, maybe you need to really balance your work and lifetime carefully. So yeah, there's healthcare and social needs, but we kind of talked about that. All right. So once you've kind of understood, okay, what do I want? What are my personal and economic motivations? Now it's time to start taking a look at what's out there. And one way to start segmenting, because it can be overwhelming once you start looking at the number of companies out there. So if we start segmenting these into different sectors, so you got the private sector, government, nonprofit, academia, and entrepreneurship. Lots of possibilities, but this will help kind of give a framework for starting to analyze, especially if you're not quite sure where you want to go. Okay, so let's just talk about a couple of these sectors. So the first one that most people know the best is the private sector. So it includes Fortune 500 companies, but it also includes small companies, medium companies. Pretty much just any company that is generally for profit falls into this category. Some things to consider when doing this. So the overall income potential is much greater within in the private sector. That's not a big surprise, especially if you coming out of the government. You've seen that you could probably make more money in the private sector. Okay, in terms of opportunities for mobility, especially once you start talking about the Fortune 500 companies or bigger corporations, there's a lot of upward mobility potential. Most of it is performance based, but you know, the sky's the limit to what you want to do. You could find yourself, you could start as a manager, work your way up to an executive, you know, officer, or just stay where you're at if that works. One of the things that comes into the private sector is work-life balance. And it really does apply to this next one too, where you see minimal job security. Of course, we're all experiencing that right now with COVID-19, but just understand within the private sector, it can be very demanding. And as far as job security, you know, we see layoffs left and right. If the company has to make a bottom line work out, or is looking at increasing profit margins or these other things, this all comes into play in the private sector. Okay, government. So most of us have some sort of background in the government. It's like this comfortable area, yet it's like the area that you might not want to go back to. It's like maybe if you come from a small hometown like me and you love to visit there, but you don't want to stay there. You know, sometimes that can be when you think about the government. You know, it's a comfortable area, but maybe you don't want to stay there. Or maybe you do, and that's okay too. So a couple things to consider about the government. One, the hiring process. So if you've ever dealt with the hiring process for whether you're at the DoD or any other area of the government, it tends to be very convoluted, very regimented, you know, and it's hard to personalize the process. That's kind of done intentionally. There's pros and cons to that. Just be aware if you're going into looking at a government position. And we can do a whole long talk about government application processes too, if there's interest in that. Generally, there's a very defined career path. You'll see if you think about the GS11s, GS12s, GS13s, or all the different ways in terms of positions, titles, and ranks that they put within government positions. Government, you know, we talk about entrenched bureaucracy, that kind of has a negative view, but one definite reality is that it is driven by politics and political realities. If you're in the Department of Defense, your budget can change with the administration. It can change with just a couple different personalities. So the politics come into play heavily, whether you're looking at federal, state, or local governments. Job security generally tends to be pretty high. Even now during the COVID-19, you're not hearing a ton of government layoffs yet. That doesn't mean that they won't happen or can't happen, but generally based off of the funding and how the funding process works in the government, there's generally some sort of stability. Now, don't take that for granted. My son-in-law works for the city of Mankato. As people lose their jobs, there's less income taxes. As there's less income taxes coming in, less revenue for the government, they start to have to make decisions on what agencies and what offices that they're going to keep and what ones they start to downsize. So it's not, don't take it for granted, but there generally is more security there. Okay, nonprofit. So the great thing about nonprofit is it's super mission focused, and generally that mission is some focus on improving people's lives. Lots of different nonprofit organizations out there, lots of different nonprofit organizations here in the Twin Cities. So you see that first one, really working with passionate people, believing in the cause. You'll see that at nonprofits. The other one I want to highlight is expect to wear many hats. So the good news is if you're one of those people that just likes to keep changing what they're doing, I like to be just in the middle of the stuff. A nonprofit is a great place to be because one day you'll be doing operations, next day you're going to be working donations, the day after that you're going to be working on a new marketing campaign. Very, very common in nonprofits. Challenges, the salary is typically lower. So again, that shouldn't be a surprise. It's nonprofit, but also understand that nonprofits are generally driven a lot by donations. So when we're in a COVID-19 world, less donations, the more challenges you have. Less donations that come in for nonprofits, the more stress everybody's trying to figure out how they're going to make ends meet and how to continue the mission with reduced funds. And the other piece is, and this depends on the size of the nonprofit, is really upward mobility. May be limited, especially if it's a small organization. And this is true not just for small nonprofits, but also it's true for small companies as well. Your upward mobility, you know, if it's a family-owned business, you know, and you're not part of the family, you might only be able to make it so far. Okay, academia. So up to COVID-19, academia was an awesome option that was very, very scheduled, kind of predictable in terms of what you're going to be doing. You see that very first bullet, defined schedule tied to academic school year. Ask anybody who's in the academic world right now what they're going to do starting the fall, and they may tell you, I don't know. But taking COVID-19 out of the picture, it still will tend to be a fairly defined schedule in terms of timing of the academic school year itself. Academia can be very, very rewarding. You're helping teach students, you're helping share your experiences and knowledge. You're growing as an individual. And there's plenty of organizations and road pathways to becoming a teacher, whether we're talking about high school, college, ROTC, lots of different options. So I know that we have at least one or two people here today that are coming from an academic background from their last position. All right, the last one, I think this is the last one, entrepreneurship, owning your own business. This was one of the things that I wanted to do. One of the many things that I wanted to do was I wanted to start my own business. I had no money. I did have a actually decent business plan, but I had no money. So that wasn't an option for me. And also I needed to do some work-life balance things. Owning your own business, whether you're a startup or whatever kind of environment, is really, really exciting. Because really you get to be able to create the business vision, create the plan, bring things to market, pursue, whether you're talking bring a product to market, bring a service to market, you get to really, really kind of be able to be in charge of that portion of your destiny. There's a lot of challenges. I just talked about how I didn't have much money, so raising capital, financing, in the same way that nonprofits are really focused on trying to bring funds in. As an entrepreneur, you're also kind of dealing with that. Maybe the product and service that you're producing is going to bring in a whole bunch of money, so there's no problem in VC funding, or maybe not. And the reality right now is VC funding or venture capital funding is pretty hard to come by. Lots of uncertainty, because you are in charge of your own business. Now, that being said, there's a lot of options. If you're interested in that, I took the Boots to Business. It was a great course, and there's a lot of other options for that. So just think about that. Okay, let's see. We're already at 5:40, so I'm going to kind of speed through some of these things. I'm going to skip that one. Okay, let's talk information interviews. So we laid out several different sectors. So what do you do and how do you find out more information? Okay, so really informational interviews are key to this. One of the things that when I talk to somebody coming out and getting ready to transition, and they don't know where to start, I'll say pick an industry, a company, or a job, and seek somebody in one of those three to set up an informational interview. And all you're trying to do is just find out more information. Talk a little bit about kind of what your interest is and what your passions are, but also really understand what their life is. What is the view from that job, or what is that view in that company? What is that view in that market? What are the things that keep them up at night? What are the things that keep their boss up at night? What are the critical business issues? And then lastly, of course, with any kind of engagement, we want to also be able to use that as an opportunity to connect with other people. Okay, so we talked about a lot of different stuff here, but really, if we start recapping it, because I think that's my last slide. That is my last slide. First, in preparation, understand yourself, understand your strengths, understand your backgrounds, understand start to learn what you want to do, set an objective and a strategy. Do your research, okay? If you need help with the research, just let us know. Whether it's like one of the things that I did before leaving the military is I actually subscribed to the Wall Street Journal for about 2-3 years. And slowly I was able to water drip information about the market for myself and be able to gradually get a better understanding. And I happen to work in the defense acquisition community doing modeling and simulation. So I was able to kind of test some of those theories, even with some of the defense contractors. But start doing research. There's plenty of research on the internet. There's lots of different options. Develop a network of contacts to help teach you more and take that time. All I want to know is, what is the car industry looking like today? All I want to know is Be the Match. It's a nonprofit that works on DNA matching for, I think it's bone marrow, if I remember right. I want to know more about that, for example. Focus. So we want to do everything, but we can't do everything. So start narrowing that down to say 5 to 8 main contenders or less that you want to pursue and take time with. Because doing a job search, you can find yourself doing resumes, 10 different kinds of resumes if you're not careful. And it's not a very effective search process. Okay. And lastly, when you do land the position, because you are going to land the position sooner or later, bring that knowledge that you've done, bring that research, bring your own backgrounds into your new job to really make it a great experience for yourself and for everybody around. Okay, so that's the formal part of my presentation. Questions or comments?
Great job, Michael. Thank you.
Well, I tell you, you all can learn from me in all of my epic, interesting weeks I've had. So you talked about what you learned at TAP. And if I could talk about that really quickly, because everything that I've, in the job you said you didn't get. And every single TAP that I've been to, they've said, softer, gentle, dust mopper. Do not come in there with a hammer. And well, come to find out, this veteran guy that was on there in this position that I happen to be interested in, everybody's loved me up until this guy, I feel like. And, when they ask you, well, I'm just really, they ask you like the scenario questions and, I felt like I had to be gentler, I guess, for lack of better words. And I don't think that he liked that. And I was like, gosh, everything I've been taught at this is most companies do not want us to come in, I'm going to pull the rug out and I'm going to be a drill sergeant. And I actually feel like this 5th interview that I've had now, this place is the one, I don't know. I'm just a self-critic anyway, but so interesting that you say that. So you're right. It's not always the case in every single position because this one particular person just didn't really seem the kinder, assess your situation, learn your employees, and then go from there. He was like, yeah, we need someone to come in there and just take charge. And I'm like, oh, awesome. Well, that's what I naturally would do. But I feel like I shouldn't have said that.
Brittany, one of the things, and when we're going through this process, it's really understanding what is the needs of that position. So for example, when I came in as a product manager at MTS, that team was in chaos. So what they needed was strong leadership. In fact, what helped me get the position wasn't my technical background. That just got me into the door to have the conversation. What they were really assessing me on was my leadership potential within the company and ability to take a group of people that none of them worked for me, and really kind of bring kind of order to the chaos. So it really depends on the culture of the company and the specific position.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll add as an employer, this is Katie. It's not always either on the position of the company or their employment brand either. Sometimes you just have to read the room. Like the person that you're interviewing against, like especially when you're going through 5 interviews, like holy smokes, lots of interviews, but heck, virtual world we're in, you can't meet the whole team at once, but everyone's going to be looking for something different. And so on the front end of your process, anything that you can do to dig deep and ask them the questions on what they're looking for and what they think they need in the position, and then tailoring your approach is only going to benefit you, right? Because company is one thing, but people have personalities, and you can't always separate that, you know.
So true. Michael, this is Renee. I had a question. You were talking about government jobs and security and stuff like that. Do you feel like it, or tell me what you think are the differences between the local and the state and federal level when you're talking about government jobs?
You know, it's interesting because oftentimes, and I think that presentation kind of lumped government jobs as mainly the federal. It said, in fact, it said on the top, you know, think the big three. But there's such a big difference between local, state, and federal jobs. And it also depends, let's just talk local. There's a big difference between being the mayor of Minneapolis and the mayor of small town Minnesota. So the variance, and I got to watch my son-in-law who got a master's degree in public administration, and I got to watch as he was applying at different jobs. He works for Mankato now, but he also applied out at Carver, as well as several different other cities. And each one, it was really challenging for him because each city had such a different level of scope and scale, you know, and needs. That it was a challenge for him sometimes to tailor his resume and his talking points, you know, fast enough, you know, for that. So obviously we're real familiar with federal jobs, and state jobs themselves are still fairly, you know, large scale. But really, if you're looking for kind of, you know, maybe a smaller, like we talked about large companies and small companies, same can be applied, especially at the local level.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, guys, thanks for all the time. Alan, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Good, good. I'm going to pause or stop recording.